Luke 7:36-50. One of the Pharisees invited Jesus to eat with him, and after he entered the Pharisee's home, he took his place at the table. Meanwhile, a woman from the city, a sinner, discovered that Jesus was dining in the Pharisee's house. She brought perfumed oil in a vase made of alabaster. Standing behind him at his feet and crying, she began to wet his feet with her tears. She wiped them away with her hair and kissed them and poured oil on them. When the Pharisee who had invited Jesus saw what was happening, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know what kind of woman is touching him. He would know that she was a sinner." Jesus replied, "Simon, I have something to say to you." "Teacher, speak," he said. "A certain lender has two debtors. One owed enough money to pay 500 people for a day's work, and the other owed enough money for 50. When they couldn't pay, the lender forgave the debts of them both. Which of them will love him more?" Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the greatest debt canceled." And Jesus said, "You have judged correctly." Jesus turned to the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? When I entered your home, you didn't give me water for my feet, but she wet my feet with tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't greet me with a kiss, but she hasn't stopped kissing my feet since I came in. You didn't anoint my head with oil, but she has poured perfumed oil on my feet. And this is why I tell you that her many sins have been forgiven. So she has shown great love. The one who is forgiven little loves little." And then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other table guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this person that even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace."
Your faith, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Amen. Well, I'm not quite done. Jesus said this to the woman, a woman unnamed, a woman both particular and universal. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. That simple, that profound. Jesus' sacred promise to her and to us, to anyone, everyone who dares follow Jesus. If we see her, truly see her, Jesus embodies two principles, and there are four movements in this story. So let me take you through them. First principle, eating together. Bread broken and food shared. Sustaining and transforming. We know that food sustains us and can transform us. And the joy of shared meals. Even competitive meals like the Great Chili Cook-Off. Such joy, such fun. True, shared meals can be a challenge in these polarizing days. A relative idolizing the House of Whiteness at the holiday meal is not always a pleasant experience. Nevertheless, meals are places of transformation. Two consistent acts of Jesus in Luke's gospel are the journey and the shared meals, especially in Luke's gospel, a lot happens over meals, and this is one of them. The overarching trajectory of Jesus in Luke is going on a journey with stops to share meals along the way. The frequent stopping place along the journey is Jesus eating with others, often others who are either marginalized or in a place of power and privilege. So here is the intersection of both of those. Second principle, encountering the other. The other, often being the outcast, the marginalized. Encounters with potential to transform the holy other into the holy other. The W-H-O-L-L-Y into the H-O-L-Y, other. Or, if you use capital letters, the God in us, the divine spark of life in us, the holy other. With these two principles in view, let's explore the four movements in this story. Movement one, a Pharisee invites Jesus to dinner. Others are also invited, presumably other Pharisees. In her brilliant Believers' Church commentary, Mary Schurtz reminds us, Jesus is hosted several times by Pharisees in Pharisees' homes. Indeed, Jesus and Pharisees have much in common. We often sort of denigrate Pharisees. Pharisees, of the four religious groupings at the time, were actually the progressives, the liberals, the most tolerant. And one of their reasons for gathering is to debate whatever concern or question or controversy is coming up at the time. And Jesus enters into that conversation with them. Witness the Pharisees' discomfort and internal grumbling without banishing this woman, a woman scorned and outcast. Pharisees frequently gathered to debate whatever given concern and contention was they were facing at the moment. For Jesus and the Pharisees, this is also a sort of in-house theological discussion to break down how do we understand what's happening around us. So that's what's going on here in this meal with Jesus and the Pharisees. But the thorn in the flesh of this one, of course, is this woman comes in to the picture, intrudes into the meal. She doesn't eat with them. She comes behind Jesus and embodies this profound love, using tears and hair and hands that touch Jesus' feet and wash them, and just simply is there with Jesus in this moment. So that's the second movement. Hers is an act of loving gratitude for Jesus in response to her own transformation. It is also an act of bold resistance against dehumanizing systems and expectations that are happening along the way. Are we hearing now? I didn't realize. Are we okay?
They're having a little trouble with hearing.
Hearing, okay. Hers is an act of loving gratitude for Jesus. Now, with that? Okay, now there, I think. Is that better? Okay. So let's begin with the second movement. This woman embodies great love for Jesus. Hers is a passionate, embodied movement of love, with using her tears, her hair, her hands, and touching Jesus in this very intimate way, showing her deep love for Jesus. It is an act of loving gratitude for Jesus in response to her own transformation. It is also an act of bold resistance against the systems of discrimination and oppression that are going on there. The host Pharisee, note, does internal venting without confronting the woman. He's not even doing this out loud. And Jesus intuitively responds to his internal grumbling. If he only knew who she was, he can't be a prophet, and so on. Misunderstanding both Jesus and the prophets of the time. The third movement, Jesus names and challenges the Pharisee. So Jesus intuits the internal dialogue and addresses him, but to do that, there's a specific shift here from the Pharisee identified in this category of people to Jesus speaking to him, naming him. That's very important. Names are very important. And now he shifts to Simon. Jesus says, I have something to say to you. Genuine dialogue comes when we acknowledge and name and look at each other and address each other as humans with a name. So naming is profoundly important. And Jesus does that here for Simon. He names Simon, breaks open the scene. Simon, I have something to say to you. To Simon, the Pharisee's credit, bearing witness again to his being liberal, he says, speak, teacher, tell me, what do you have to say? He's ready to enter into the dialogue. To give contemporary context to this encounter with Jesus, imagine Jesus saying, Donald, I have something to say to you. I will leave to your imagination where that scene might go. Frequently, Jesus tells a story and asks a question, and here he does both. Jesus tells Simon a story about debtors and lenders and money and forgiveness. And Jesus ends with a question, which forgiven person has greater love? And Simon replies, I suppose the one who had the greatest debt canceled. And Simon replies, that's what Simon's reply. And Jesus said, you've answered correctly. The fourth movement, Jesus looks at the woman who's behind him and says to Simon, do you see this woman? Again, speaking to her as a person, but also as representing all those who are othered and outcast and dismissed. Do you see this woman? Without waiting for Simon's reply, Jesus continues speaking and speaks of the litany of love that this woman has shown to him with her tears, her hair, her hands, her care at that moment. And Jesus concludes by saying to her, your sin is forgiven. We aren't told her response or Simon's response. But now the other guests start whispering, who is this who even forgives sins? The fourth movement in the entire meal encounter culminates with Jesus confirming, comforting words to this woman. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Now this woman came. It isn't that Jesus forgave her. She came forgiven. That's how and why she came. She had turned around whatever was keeping her turning away from God and turned toward God and to Jesus. That was her her faith in doing that had already saved her, was saving her. Jesus is just naming for her what has happened. She knew she was already forgiven. She did not come seeking forgiveness. Her action leads to forgiveness because to be forgiven leads to her action. The Greek word translated as forgiveness, or to forgive, is the same word as to release, to be released from something. She had been released from whatever it was that was binding her or holding her and turned toward God and Jesus. Her turn toward God released her from that, and she was released to embody deep love, creative resistance, and fearless faith. Love for Jesus, resistance to systems of oppression, faith to follow Jesus. Jesus' culminating blessing then, go in peace, is that summation blessing that Jesus offers to all of us, go in peace. However imperfectly our Anabaptist ancestors embodied deep love, creative resistance, and fearless faith, they did that in their time and in their way, and we've been spending these 5 weeks looking back, living forward to help us live forward again for the past 5 Sundays. On Easter Sunday, April 12, 1528, hunters of Anabaptist heretics invaded a small congregation celebrating the risen Christ in secret. Anabaptist leader Hans Schmidt sang a hymn of joy as he was taken out to be martyred. In you, O God, is my joy, though I must suffer here. Let me be scorned by everyone if your grace still is near. Excuse me. We conclude with 21st century Anabaptist witnesses to deep love with creative resistance and fearless faith. This year holds another Anabaptist anniversary. "75 years ago, at a Mennonite Sunday school picnic in Kansas, Mennonite Disaster Service was envisioned and born. Sally and Robert were just at the annual meeting in Kansas with, I think, some 600 people. Around, yeah. Many of you have been involved in, at one time or another, in Mennonite Disaster Service. How many have, in any way, any time, done MDS work? MDS has been a great unifier. Executive Director Kevin King declared, "God needs all hands on deck." Noting that MDS is an Anabaptist unifier, King reminded Mennonites that we can't afford to be squabbling over buildings, budgets, and boards in the context of today when there's such great need. When our neighbors need us to be salt and light, changing lives, restoring faith. Our Mennonite Central Committee is responding to the tragedy in Gaza. During the precarious ceasefire, MCC is striving to deliver more emergency supplies to Palestinians in Gaza who've been suffering from unspeakable genocide. A Palestinian in Gaza pleaded, "We are human beings, we want to live." MCC bears witness with deep, deep love with creative resistance and fearless faith. For 5 Sundays, we've been living with these 500 years of our Anabaptist ancestors and with Jesus, embodying deep love, creative resistance, and fearless faith. I want to give you time now to respond either from anything over these 5 Sundays, from our adult forum time to worship, or to Jesus and the woman in this story and Simon. Just respond. What has impressed you? What has inspired you? Dan has a microphone. Anyone want to share with others? Mary Beth has one also, yes. Brent. There's my hand. Did- Is it actually on the? Okay.
Anytime I'm in a conversation or my own contemplation about the other, first of all, as is my wont, I make a joke. If there's anybody I can't stand, it's intolerant people. I can't stand. And of course, that's the whole point, because one human's intolerance is another person's creed. And I always have to be careful about that. One of the great things about Braver Angels is you can't help but like the people on the other side in that context. Otherwise, if you're talking directly about politics, you see their character flaws. And when you're talking in terms of what you have in common, you see yourself in them.
Thank you. Finding common ground. What unites us. Anyone else? Rob?
No, I think someone on the other side. Yeah, one of the things that really just strikes me is, don't resist evil. I know that, like, when you just hear that out of context, you go like, what? You have to resist evil. But there's a different way to do it. And you can just see it play out every day in our politics. When we push harder, the other side pushes harder, and we go to extremes, and then we don't even understand each other. And that's where Jesus tells the story of going the second mile with the soldier, where you're like shaking up his world. I can only make you go 1 mile, not 2, and you stop them in their tracks, making them think. And then that's when you can start trying to make that one-on-one connection, the holy to the holy.
Thank you, Robin. And that, what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount with don't resist evil is interpreted correctly is to don't resist evil with evil. You can't resist evil by becoming the evil you deplore. Anyone else?
I just think is this on? Oh,
Yep.
I just think this Anabaptist study has come at a great time in our political history.
It has. Anyone else? Your faith is saving you. Go in peace.